Hey guys, welcome back to another analysis video of a chess miniature. On the agenda today, we have a very interesting game played between women's grandmasters Alexandra Goryachkina, arguably one of the best players in the world nowadays in the women's category, an extremely strong player. She's been around 2600 on more than one occasion, although she's dropped a bit in the rating list now. She will be playing with the white pieces. And on the black side, we have Andrea Navrotescu, originally from Romania, now playing for France. She's a woman grandmaster, a 2352 rating. I think that's more or less her peak, or very near her peak. So she's approaching the international master level, although she's not quite there yet, but she'll be there soon for sure. I had the chance to commentate with Andrea recently in the Chess for Freedom Prisons tournament. Very enjoyable. She's a very good player. In this game, she seemed to be a bit outclassed by Goryachkina, but I mean, Goryachkina is very, very strong, especially with the white pieces. And in this game, we'll learn some very interesting things. What to do when our opponent offers a slightly dubious opening line with black, how to approach this situation, and also specifically how to play against these Zeudo, Sodo, Volga, Benko, Gambit type positions. And Goryachkina plays very powerfully. I think you'll enjoy the game. So Alexandra opens with d4, her usual opening move. And here she sidesteps the Nimzo India, which was probably Andrea's idea, with the move g3. This is a very interesting approach because it can transpose to the Catalan, which we saw in our previous game, but it keeps the options open for white. Most probably the knight will come to f3, but by playing g3 straight away, Goryachkina is also sidestepping the Queen's Indian, which is normally b6, and now bishop b2 hits the rook. Now, the Queen's Indian is a very typical opening which many players have in their repertoire, and we usually get there by knight f3, b6. So by playing g3, we do sidestep the Nimzo Indian and the Queen's Indian, basically forcing black to go to, after d5, to a Catalan. Now, if your opponent doesn't have d5 in his or her repertoire, this is actually a very good move deviation to play g3 on the third move. Of course, black does have the opportunity to play c5, transposing to a Benoni. So if your opponent is comfortable in the Benoni, then g3 is not such a good move, or at least it's not a really huge opening advantage move. Because the Benoni is a very risky defense, but works quite well against the variation with g3. So I think this is a good choice by Navrotescu, going for the Benoni. However, after d5, I think she should have played d6. With a classical Benoni structure, games normally develop this way. Here knight h3 is possible, not knight f3 is more normal. Castle, castle, and what? This is a typical Benoni structure. White will play a4, possibly bishop to f4, sometimes knight d2, c4, sometimes e4. All depends on the approach that white wants to take. But this is mainline theory and very reasonable for both players. If you're playing the Benoni, g3 with white is not the most testing opening approach against the Benoni, that's for sure. Instead of that, Andrea played b5. Now she's trying to go for a good Benoni, but I would say that against any variation except for g3, then this b5 might be interesting, but against the g3 variation, where of course you're allowing white to have some tactical tricks on the line diagonal, I don't think b5 is the best move. Of course, if black plays bishop to g2 now, just normal white plays, then black goes d6, blocking the diagonal, and b5 could even prove to be useful. But of course, Goryachkina is very strong. She knows her theory, and she goes for the testing e4, the best move, threatening both e5 and also bishop takes b5. And of course, if black does capture the pawn, then bishop to g2 is extremely strong. Now, if the knight goes back to f6, you lose on the spot. We check, bishop e7, d6 wins a piece, and queen e7, we exchange queens, and d6 with the double threat of the rook and the bishop on e7. So here we're already winning a piece. So actually against bishop to g2, black has to drop back to d6 to block the pawn, but then we just develop it normally. And look how, after a few moves, black will have really big trouble to develop their queen side. White has easy development here. Pieces go to natural squares. And when we've deployed our pieces, we can think about attacking on the king side with something like that, or something on the queen side. Black is very difficult to develop the pieces on the queen side. And this is good compensation for the pawn, excellent compensation for the pawn. Navrotescu, probably knowing this beforehand, plays bishop to d6. Again, I don't like this move. Okay, you get to develop, that's important, but although you're controlling the e5 square, black's pieces are placed sort of clumsily. I know this is theory, but to play this you have to be very, very precise in your moves. White played knight to d2, an excellent move, protecting the pawn on e4, but after some a4 or some bishop takes b5, the knight can go to c4. So this is a very strong move, knight to d2. Probably queen a5 was the best move here, protecting the pawn. Andrea castled, and now the pawn on b5 is dropped. Of course, it's true that now the bishop can't go to fianchetto, so g3 is a bit out of place, but it's not very serious, and we have got the pawn back, and black still has to develop the queen side. So, white is better. Rook to e8 hits the pawn with the knight. f3. Note that typically when you play rook to e8, hitting the pawn on e4, you also threaten knight takes d5 because of the pin. However, in this position, if black captures the pawn on d5, they get hit by knight to c4 with a double attack on the two pieces, and obviously here white is winning a piece. So Andrea plays queen to a5, attacking the bishop, bishop to c4. And here I would say Andrea makes her third and decisive mistake. Well, maybe it's not the decisive mistake, but already after this move, she's in trouble. She plays bishop to f8 with the idea to try and get d6 in, maybe finish her development. The computer suggests bishop to a6 or bishop to e5 as more promising for black, although I still think white is better here. After bishop to f8, Goryachkina plays knight to e2, and now I think Andrea definitely messes up her opportunities. If she played here d6, castle, knight b to d7, I do think white is better in this position. Slightly more active, more center control. Black has a passive position, but okay, it's everything to play for. Knight comes to c3. This knight will definitely end up on c4 after the exchange of bishops. White is better, but there's still a game here. Instead of that, Navrotescu played g5. Now this is a bad move. I understand the reasoning behind the move, but this is a bad move. You can't advance the pawns of your king side with a positional aim, which is to play g4 and undermine the pawn structure. But you can't do this when A, you're badly developed, and B, your king is behind the pawn. You're going to get crushed. For sure. No chance. And I'm sure that Navrotescu knows this. But sometimes when we play chess, all of you can relate to this. We think of some ideas. We know they're not probably correct, but we don't see anything better. And inside us we think, okay, it might work in this position. And after the game, we obviously realize that things didn't go our way. So no shame in playing this. For sure, Navrotescu will get over it. For sure. She's a very strong player. But objectively speaking, this is a bad move. Castle, g4, and we just capture on g4. And now, of course, black will recover the pawn, but our f file is opened. The bishop on c4 can attack. The queen will end up coming to the king side. and black still has the queen side undeveloped. So this is a disaster. For example, in the game, Andrea played knight takes g4, which is probably the best move under the circumstances, trying to make a blockade on the e5 square. If she'd captured on e4, then I think the game might have continued like this. Knight takes, rook takes, queen to d3 hitting the rook to keep the initiative, and queen to f5. I just don't see how black can hold the f7 square. d6 is coming. This is a disaster. So she captured on g4, and now of course it's very important, let's say, to understand why Navrotescu has a bad position. We also need Goryachkina to play very energetically, because if not, black will end up somehow consolidating. Imagine giving me 2 or 3 moves with white, let's say some random weak moves, a3, let's say king h1, let's say rook b1, and let's say some king g2. Well, not king g2. This would be bad, but you know what I mean. You get the drift. Something like this, and already this position, I would be surprised that black was much worse in this position. Even a pawn down, black's pieces are more or less active. There's a blockade on the dark squares, a certain blockade. Things are looking bad, but holdable for black in this position. So white needs to play energetically. Of course, Goryachkina understands this perfectly, and she goes d6, hitting the f7 pawn, underlining the 3 weak pieces, and also vacating the d5 square for the knight, for the bishop. But, I mean, this is a crushing move. Knight to e5, defending and attacking. Bishop to d5, want to keep this bishop on the game. And now every move of white is a threat. Now we hit the queen. If the knight is taken, f7 is hanging with the rook or with the bishop, whatever white prefers. So black played queen to b5, and now the other knight comes in hitting the queen. The queen comes in hitting f7. Every move of white is an attack. And finally, rook takes f7 is the resigning threat, after which Navrotescu decides to leave the game, because, I mean, you just can't take this attack. Of course, if black captures, then it's just mate in 2. And another fun variation would be, for example, bishop to g7. Of course, white has several ways of winning, more than one, but I thought this one was quite nice. Double check. He has to capture with the king, another check, and a nice finish with the 2 bishops mate. And here we can see the success of white's attack, and also it's interesting to see how finally the queen side is still undeveloped and black has suffered a tough defeat. So, summing the game up, we can see that Navrotescu decides to play very ambitiously in the opening with this b5, a correct defense but risky. But then she followed up with certain moves which are not entirely justified under circumstances. Goryachkina played very ambitiously, very enterprisingly, very aggressively, taking advantage of her lead in development, and ended up with a very promising attack. And she finished off with a crushing mating attack. I hope you enjoyed the game. It's another way of getting to know a bit better the world's best woman female players. Goryachkina is number 1 in the number 1, 2 in the world rankings of women players. Very strong player. You can see on the right here, she has a very intense gaze. I've interviewed her several times. Only once she smiled to me. That was actually one of my successes as an interviewer, because she hardly ever smiles. She's very intense, very nice person, but very intense and very strong character, very aggressive player, strong player, and yeah, probably nowadays one of the 2 or 3 best players in the world. And Andrea, I'm sure this will be a huge experience for her in her quest to get the international title. As I said before, these days I'm traveling in the chess cruise. So if you want to see some pics of the cruise and the chess tournament in the cruise, through the Adriatic Sea down to Athens. You can follow me on Instagram, where I'll probably be posting some stories. And meanwhile, I just hope you enjoy these games. Enjoy and have fun. Of course, don't forget to have fun.